At some point in your life, someone has said something to you that was so profoundly stupid that you just stood there, stunned and completely speechless. Not because you had nothing to say, but because you couldn't believe what you were hearing. You thought, surely this person can't be serious. And yet, they were. Completely serious and dangerously stupid. So what do? You can't fix stupid. You cannot educate someone who has decided they already know everything. You can't win an argument with someone who processes the world entirely through emotion and ego. The 5 responses you are about to learn are not insults. They are not weapons for humiliation. They are precision instruments, tools that protect your intelligence, preserve your dignity, and neutralize stupidity with a composure so controlled that the other person doesn't even realize they've been disarmed. And by the time you reach number 1, the single most powerful response on this entire list, you will understand why the wisest people in history almost never needed to raise their voice. These 5 responses are ordered deliberately. We start with the one that requires the least effort, something you could deploy tomorrow morning without even breaking a sweat. And we count all the way down to the one that requires the most discipline, but delivers the kind of result that people remember for a very long time. Master them in order, and pay attention. Response 5. That's your opinion, and I respect it, but I don't share it. We start here because this one has the lowest barrier to entry. You don't need deep reserves of composure to say it. You don't need to think quickly. You just need to decide, in advance, that you are not available for the kind of circular, pointless debate that goes nowhere, proves nothing, and costs you 45 minutes of your life that you are never getting back. This one is for the person who cannot let it go, the one at Thanksgiving dinner who keeps pushing their worldview on you like a timeshare salesman who smells a maybe, the colleague who mistakes volume for conviction, the acquaintance who has decided, apparently from a very thorough internal investigation, that your disagreement is a personal attack on their entire identity. You don't argue. You don't explain yourself. You don't provide a 17-point rebuttal of their position, because a 17-point rebuttal deserves a 17-point audience. And this isn't one. You simply look at them and say, that's your opinion and I respect it, but I don't share it. The effect is immediate. There is nothing to argue against. You haven't dismissed them. You've acknowledged them. You haven't attacked them. You've simply drawn a line. And a line, delivered with absolute calm, is something a loud person has absolutely no idea how to cross. They'll try to redraw it, move it, argue that it shouldn't exist, but it does, because you said so, and you've already moved on. Seneca wrote, "To be a slave to the opinion of others is the worst of all prisons." This phrase is the key out of that prison. You can say it with a perfectly pleasant smile, and they will never quite figure out why they feel so completely dismissed. That's the point. Now that one works beautifully when someone is pushing you, but what about when the tone shifts, when the conversation stops being annoying and becomes genuinely hostile? When somebody decides that today is the day they are going to come at you, that's where you need something with a bit more stopping power. And it's only 7 words. Response 4. Let's talk when we can do it respectfully. There is a particular kind of conversation that is not actually a conversation at all. It's an ambush wearing the costume of a dialogue. The other person interrupts constantly, raises their voice to signal authority they don't have, and uses aggression as a substitute for an argument they are not capable of making. And they are counting on you to engage on those terms. Just don't. Let's talk when we can do it respectfully. 7 words. No shouting, no dramatic exit, no lengthy lecture about why their behavior is unacceptable, because that speech would be completely wasted on them, and somewhere in the back of your mind you already know that. You simply establish the standard. You are not refusing to engage. You are not walking away defeated. You are raising the floor of the conversation to a height where it might actually be worth having. Epictetus, who was, for a significant portion of his life, quite literally a slave, and still managed to develop one of the most powerful philosophies of self-mastery in recorded history, said, "You cannot control what others do, but you can control what you accept." This response is that principle made portable. You're not accepting the noise. You're not engaging with the chaos. And whoever cannot meet you at a basic standard of respect has, by their own behavior, quietly disqualified themselves from the conversation. You didn't exclude them, they excluded themselves. You simply acknowledge the outcome. Think of it as a velvet rope policy. Not everyone gets in, and no, that is not arrogance. That is just having standards. All right. So we have a way to handle the person who won't stop pushing, and a way to handle the one who comes in aggressive. But here is the one that surprises people most, because this next response isn't a boundary at all. It doesn't shut anything down. It opens something up, and what it opens, if you use it correctly, leads directly to the other person doing your job for you. Response 3. That's an interesting perspective. What made you think of that? This is where we shift from defense into something closer to a controlled demolition. And this is where intelligent people who practice this technique start to actually enjoy difficult conversations. Because this one is almost elegant in how it works. Someone makes a provocative comment, a dismissive remark, a confident declaration of something so misinformed you can feel a small part of your brain quietly filing a complaint. And instead of correcting them, arguing with them, or rehearsing a devastating rebuttal in the shower later that evening, you look at them with complete, open-faced curiosity and say, "That's an interesting perspective. What made you think of that?" What happens next is worth watching carefully. Because the average person who launches that kind of comment has not thought it through. They are running on emotion, assumption, or some half-absorbed opinion they picked up from somewhere and never actually examined. The moment you ask them to trace their reasoning, to show their work, they have to actually find it, and very often they cannot. They start to stumble, they qualify, they hedge. Suddenly it's, well, generally speaking, and I mean, it just kind of seems like. And slowly, without you laying a single finger on their argument, it begins to collapse under its own weight. You didn't defeat them, they defeated themselves. You just handed them the rope, asked a polite question, and waited patiently. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." While they came to provoke, you responded with curiosity. While they came in low, you stayed elevated. The contrast is clear to everyone in the room. Everyone, that is, except the person who made the comment, who will spend the next 20 minutes trying to figure out exactly what went wrong and not quite getting there. Now, so far, everything on this list has been about handling unjustified attacks. Pushers, aggressors, provocateurs. But what about the situation that almost nobody prepares for? What happens when someone criticizes you and they're actually right? That's where most intelligent people make their most costly mistake. And the response that fixes it is the one that feels, at first, the most impossible to say. But stay with me, because this one has a payoff. Response 2. You're absolutely right, and here's what I'm going to do about it. This one sounds like surrender. It feels like surrender. Every instinct you have is going to tell you loudly and confidently that it is surrender. It is not even close. Sometimes the fastest, most decisive way to control a situation is to remove your opponent's ammunition before they've finished loading it. When someone identifies a legitimate flaw, even if they do it loudly, rudely, or in front of an audience that could not have been more strategically selected if they tried, the intelligent response is not to defend, deflect, or diminish. It is to own it completely and move, without hesitation, to solutions. You're absolutely right, and here's what I'm going to do about it. The effect on the other person is almost disorienting. They prepared for a fight. They rehearsed for resistance. They expected the back and forth, the defensiveness, the excuses, the full performance. Instead, you gave them the one thing they actually came for, acknowledgement, and then immediately redirected everything to action. There is nothing left to argue about. You didn't just take the conflict off the table, you replaced the table entirely. Epictetus said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." Taking immediate, undefended ownership of a real mistake is not weakness. It is the single most disarming display of confidence you can offer. Because only someone with nothing to prove can do it without flinching. One critical note. This response is only for when the criticism is actually valid. Do not deploy it to absorb unfair attacks. That is not wisdom. That is people-pleasing in a trench coat, and you will know the difference if you are honest with yourself. The power here is precision. Save it for the moments that deserve it. When you use it correctly, critics become collaborators, adversaries become allies, and the person who walked in loud usually walks out quiet, and, if you watch closely, just slightly impressed, even if they would never say so out loud. So, we've given you a way to deflect the pusher, stop the aggressor, redirect the provocateur, and completely disarm the critic. And each of those responses required at least a few words. What comes next requires almost none. And that economy, that absolute refusal to give more than is necessary, is precisely what makes it the most powerful thing on this entire list. Number one is not a comeback. It's not an argument. It's not a phrase you rehearse or a strategy you build. It is a decision. And when you make it correctly, the person who came to destabilize you will leave the interaction feeling like they made a significant error in target selection. Response 1. The pause, then, thank you for that insight. Here it is. 5 words. Then silence. And that silence, that 2 or 3 seconds of absolute stillness, is where all the power lives. Here's what happens. Someone says something particularly outrageous, publicly dismissive, deliberately undermining, the kind of comment designed to make you flinch, react, and lose composure in front of everyone watching. And instead of reacting, you stop, you hold eye contact, you let the silence sit just long enough for every single person in the room to fully hear what was just said. And then, without a single trace of visible anger, without sarcasm, without even a shift in expression, you say, "Thank you for that insight." The room goes cold. The attack hung in the air like smoke. People started shifting uncomfortably, not for the presenter, but for the person who had just made it entirely clear what kind of person they were. The presenter didn't just survive the moment. They won the contract, partly because of what they said, mostly because of what they didn't. Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." This response is that principle at its absolute peak. You cannot be destabilized by something you have genuinely decided is not a threat. And when someone sees that their best shot produced nothing but your composed, grateful calm, they don't just go quiet. They retreat, because there is nothing more unsettling to a person who came looking for a fight than someone who didn't even consider fighting back. And somewhere in the back of their mind, even if they would never admit it, even if they'd rather not examine it too closely, they understand. They picked the wrong one. Now you have 5 responses, not insults, not clever comebacks. Instruments. Number 5, for the person who cannot stop pushing their opinion on you as though you asked. Number 4, for the one who believes that raising their voice is the same as having a point. Number 3, for whoever decided to be provocative without taking the precaution of actually thinking it through first. Number 2, for the rare, valuable moment when the criticism is fair and deserves to be owned without hesitation. And number 1, for the moment that matters most, when the room is watching, when the stakes are real, when someone has decided to make this personal and is waiting for you to come apart. These 5 responses work because they all share one principle. They keep you in control of yourself, of the conversation, of the room. And that is something a fool can never take from you unless you hand it to them willingly. Do not underestimate what happens when you begin to practice this. The shift is noticeable, not just to you, but to the people around you. They will tread more carefully. They will think twice, not because you've become louder or more aggressive, but because you've become something much harder to deal with, unreadable, unprovocable, elevated. And that tells people exactly who they are dealing with. Here at Mind Over Matter, this is what we do. We take the wisdom of the great thinkers and we make it practical, usable, and genuinely relevant to the life you are living right now. Not the one they told you would be fair. Subscribe now and turn on notifications, because what's coming next goes even deeper into this. And drop a comment below. Which of these 5 responses are you going to use first? I read every single one. Let's talk.